The evening air was tense, a prelude to the storm brewing in our living room. "What do you mean she's moving in tomorrow?" I asked Greg, my voice barely containing the shock and anger. Greg didn't even flinch. "It's decided, Elise. Mom's coming to live with us. It makes sense, especially now," he said. "How can you make such a decision alone?" I countered, feeling the walls of our home closing in on me. "What about our plans, the rooms?" He had that all-knowing look, the one that always set me on edge. "We'll convert your home office. It's the only logical solution." "My office, Greg. That's my space, my sanctuary." I protested. "You don't really need it," he said dismissively. "Besides, I pay the rent here, $3,000 a month. That gives me a say in how we use the space." I was stunned. This house, the one my parents had passed down to me, now felt alien, controlled by Greg's financial hold over it. "But this is my family home," I whispered more to myself than to him. "Your family home or not, I'm the one footing the bills. Now get your stuff cleared out by tomorrow." That night I couldn't sleep. The realization that our marriage was a facade built on the shaky grounds of financial power and silent submission hit me hard. The next morning I woke up to the sound of my office being emptied. Marion, Greg's mother, arrived with her suitcases, an unwelcome guest in my own home. In the days that followed, the tension escalated. Marion's presence was overbearing. She rearranged the kitchen, criticized my cooking, and worst of all, she subtly belittled me in front of my daughter, Mia. I felt like a stranger tiptoeing around my own life. Greg became more distant. His conversations were curt, his nights late. Our home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with the sounds of unspoken resentments and forced politeness. One evening, I overheard Greg and Marion discussing finances. "Elise doesn't contribute much anyway," Marion scoffed. "She should be grateful." "We're letting her stay." I felt a surge of anger. This was my family home, a place of cherished memories, now being reduced to financial transactions and power plays. The next morning, I confronted Greg. "I want to talk about the rent," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. This was my family's home. I never agreed to pay rent. Greg's response was a mix of arrogance and indifference. "Well, things change, Elise. I'm paying the bills, so technically it's more my house than yours now." That was the moment I knew our marriage, a delicate balance of love and compromise, had crumbled under the weight of control and disrespect. I called my father, Nolan, my voice shaking. "Dad, I need your help. It's about Greg." As I hung up, I realized that this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to let Greg and Moran turn my life into their dominion. They might have underestimated me, thinking I'd crumble under their control, but they were wrong. I was my father's daughter, and I knew a thing or two about standing my ground. Sitting in the empty room that used to be my office, I couldn't help but reminisce about the early days with Greg. We were like two pieces of a puzzle, fitting perfectly with our differences. But now those differences were tearing us apart. I remembered our first date, how Greg's laughter had echoed in the autumn air, how he had looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the man who had just usurped my family home. My phone buzzed, pulling me back from the past. It was a text from my father, Nolan. "I'll take care of it. Meet me at the shop tomorrow." Nolan's auto repair shop had been a staple of my childhood. It was more than a business. It was a testament to his hard work and dedication. That shop, much like our family home, held memories of a life once filled with warmth and togetherness. The next day, I walked into the familiar scent of oil and metal. Dad was under a car, his hands expertly moving as he worked. "Dad," I called out. He slid out, wiping his hands. "Elise, let's talk in the office." The office was a small room filled with trophies from car shows and framed photos of our family. It was a capsule of happier times. "I can't believe Greg is doing this," Dad said, his eyes reflecting a mix of anger and concern. I sighed. "I know, Dad. I think it's time for some payback." Dad nodded, a determined look crossing his face. "What do you have in mind?" "I want Greg and Moran out of the house, but I want to do it legally. Make them feel the pinch of their actions." Dad leaned back in his chair, pondering. "We can draw up a rental agreement, hike up the rent, make it impossible for them to stay." I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was the first step in reclaiming my life, but it also meant declaring war on Greg and Moran. "Let's do it," I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Over the next few days, Dad and I worked on the rental agreement. It was a meticulous and strategic plan designed to legally corner Greg and Moran. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction imagining their faces when they'd see the new terms. Meanwhile, back at the house, Moran's true colors began to show more vividly. She complained about everything from the way I dressed Mia to the brand of coffee I bought. Her words were like needles, subtle but piercing. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. "Yes, I've finally got a lease under my thumb. This house will be ours soon." Fury and disbelief coursed through me. How could she be so callous, so manipulative? But her words also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Mia from this toxic environment. The day came to present the rental agreement to Greg and Moran. I walked into the living room, the document in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. "Greg, we need to talk about the house," I said, my voice steady. He looked up, surprised. "What about it?" I handed him the document. "It's the new rental agreement. You need to read it." As Greg's eyes scanned the pages, I saw a range of emotions flicker across his face: confusion, disbelief, and finally, anger. "This is absurd. The rent's been raised tenfold," he exclaimed. "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's the market rate for this property. If you can't afford it, you'll have to find somewhere else to live." Greg's face turned red, his anger palpable. "You can't do this to us." "I can and I am," I replied, feeling a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. "This is my family home, Greg. You've forgotten that, but I haven't." The days following the presentation of the rental agreement were a blend of silent battles and open confrontations. Marion's true nature, once hidden under a veil of polite intrusion, now emerged in full force. One evening, I was setting the table for dinner when Marion entered the kitchen. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, landing on the simple yet nutritious meal I had prepared. "This is what you call dinner?" She scoffed. "Back in my day, we knew how to provide for our families properly." I clenched my teeth, forcing a Pollitt smile. "It's healthy, and Mia likes it." Marion snorted, dismissing my efforts with a wave of her hand. "Children don't know what's good for them. It's up to us to teach them. Clearly, you lack that understanding." Her words stung, but I remained composed. I had learned that reacting to Moran only fueled her disdain. As the days went by, Marion's presence became more oppressive. She criticized my parenting, my housekeeping, even my choice of clothes. It was as if she was deliberately trying to provoke me. One afternoon, I returned home from a quick errand to find Mia in tears and Moran sitting calmly in the living room, reading a magazine. "What happened?" I asked, rushing to comfort my daughter. "Your child is just being fussy, as usual," Moran replied without looking up. "I don't have the patience for such nonsense." I held Mia close, feeling a surge of protective anger. How could she be so cold towards her own granddaughter? Later that week, I had a meeting with a potential client for my small business. "Moran, could you please watch Mia for a couple of hours?" I asked, hoping for a bit of cooperation. Moran looked at me, her expression one of annoyance. "Fine, but make it quick. I have plans later." I returned from the meeting to find Mia once again in distress. Moran was nowhere in sight. After calming Mia down, I confronted Moran. "Where were you?" "I trusted you to look after her," I said, my voice filled with frustration. Moran rolled her eyes. "I had to step out for a bit. She was sleeping anyway. What's the big deal?" The big deal was that Marian's selfishness was now affecting Mia, my most precious treasure. I realized then that Marian would never change. Her contempt for me had spilled over to Mia, and I wouldn't tolerate it any longer. I called my father that night, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. "Dad, it's getting worse. She's not just targeting me now, she's neglecting Mia." Nolan's response was swift and resolute. "We need to speed up our plan. It's not safe for you and Mia there anymore." The following day I saw Greg and Moran whispering in the living room, their heads closed together in conspiracy. "What are you two plotting now?" I asked, a hard edge to my voice. Greg looked up, his expression one of feigned innocence. "Just discussing some financial matters, nothing for you to worry about." But I knew better. The rental agreement had unsettled them, and now they were scrambling. I could almost smell their desperation, a scent that under different circumstances might have been satisfying. Instead, I felt a cold resolve settling in my heart. They had underestimated me, thinking I would crumble under their pressure, but they were wrong. I was ready to fight back, not just for myself, but for Mia. The battle lines were drawn, and I was no longer just a passive player in their game of control. I was about to change the rules entirely. Every day in the house felt like walking on a tightrope. Marian's presence loomed large, a constant source of negativity. Her comments were like thorns, pricking away at my patience and resolve. One evening, as I put Mia to bed, I overheard Moran speaking to Greg in hushed tones in the living room. "Elise is not fit to be a mother. She's too soft, too indecisive. You need someone who can actually run a household efficiently." I stood frozen, listening to their conversation. Greg's reply was a weak agreement, a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Marian's sharp words. The next day, I confronted Greg. "Do you really think I'm a bad mother?" I asked, my voice shaking. Greg avoided my gaze. "It's not just about being a mother, Elise. It's about being responsible, about being adequate." The word echoed in my mind, a stinging indictment of my role in this family. As the days passed, Moran's manipulations grew bolder. She rearranged the furniture to her liking, disposed of items she deemed unnecessary, and took over the kitchen, effectively pushing me to the margins of my own home. One day I came home to find Mia crying inconsolably. Moran was in the kitchen, completely ignoring her. "Why aren't you attending to her?" I demanded, my heart racing with worry. Marian shrugged, a cold detachment in her eyes. "She needs to learn to soothe herself. It's part of growing up." That night I called my father, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. Greg and Marian are destroying everything I hold dear. I need to get out." Nolan's response was immediate and firm. "You and Mia come stay with me. We'll sort this out." I hesitated. Leaving the house meant giving up the fight, but staying meant subjecting Mia and myself to more torment. The decision crystallized the next morning when I found my personal belongings boxed up in the garage. Marian had decided they were cluttering the house. That act of violation was the final straw. I packed our essentials, taking one last look at the home that had once been a haven of love and happiness. As I closed the door behind me, a sense of relief washed over me. I was leaving behind the oppressive walls of that house, but I was also stepping into the unknown. Staying with my father brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Mia's laughter returned, filling the house with joy, but the battle was far from over. I met with my lawyer to discuss the divorce. I want full custody of Mia, I stated firmly, and I want the house back. The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. We'll build a strong case. You have rights. As the legal proceedings began, I realized this was more than just a divorce. It was a fight for my identity, for my daughter's future, and for justice against the tyranny of Greg and Moran. Greg's reaction to the divorce papers was a mix of shock and anger. You're making a mistake, Elise. You won't win this. But I was resolute. I had tolerated, endured, and sacrificed enough. It was time to reclaim my life and protect my daughter from the toxic environment Greg and Marion had created. I was no longer the passive, accommodating Elise. I was a mother, a fighter, and I was ready to take back control. The divorce proceedings were a cold, calculated dance of legal maneuvers and emotional confrontations. Greg's shock at my decision to leave quickly turned into a bitter determination to fight back. I sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing the documents. He's contesting the custody of Mia, I said, my voice laced with disbelief. The lawyer nodded solemnly. He's also challenging your claim to the house, but we have a strong case. As the legal battle ensued, my resolve hardened. This was no longer just about leaving a failed marriage. It was about standing up against the injustice and manipulation I had endured. In the midst of this, my father and I finalized our plan for the rental agreement. It was a strategic move designed to legally compel Greg and Marion to vacate my family home. One afternoon, I arrived at the house to deliver the new rental terms. Greg and Moran were waiting, their expressions a mix of defiance and curiosity. I handed Greg the document, watching his face as he read through it. His eyes widened in disbelief. This is ridiculous. You're increasing the rent to an exorbitant amount. Yes, Greg, I replied calmly. That's the market rate for a property of this size and location. Moran interjected, her voice shrill with panic. You can't do this to us, Elise. This is our home. No, Moran, I countered, standing my ground. This is my family home. You and Greg have made it clear that I'm not welcome here. So if you wish to stay, these are the new terms. Greg slammed the document on the table, his anger palpable. We'll fight this. You won't get away with it. But behind his words, I sensed his fear. The realization that they were losing control was dawning on them. As I left the house, a bittersweet feeling enveloped me. I had taken a significant step in reclaiming my home, but the sight of Mia's abandoned toys in the living room reminded me of the personal cost of this battle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal appointments and emotional upheaval. I clung to Mia, her innocence, and love my anchors in the storm. During one of the hearings, Greg's true colors came to the forefront. Elise is unstable, Your Honor, he claimed. She's not fit to be a sole custodian. I listened, my heart pounding, as my lawyer countered his baseless accusations with evidence of my stable income and loving relationship with Mia. In a subsequent meeting, Greg's lawyer proposed a settlement. Greg is willing to relinquish his claim to the house in exchange for joint custody and a reduction in the rent. I hesitated, torn between the desire to end this battle and the need to protect Mia from Greg and Marion's toxic influence. But then I remembered Mia's tears, Marion's callousness, and Greg's betrayal. This was no longer just about winning a legal battle. It was about justice and setting an example for my daughter. I refuse, I said firmly. I will not compromise on Mia's well-being or my family home. The decision to continue the fight was a difficult one, but it was necessary. I was no longer the woman who tolerated disrespect and manipulation. I was fighting for my rights, for my daughter's future, and for the dignity that Greg and Moran had tried to strip away from me. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon. Armed with the legal documents, I stood at the doorstep of what used to be my sanctuary, now a battleground. Greg opened the door, his face a mask of defiance. Moran hovered behind him, her eyes betraying her anxiety. "What do you want, Elise?" Greg asked, his tone icy. "I'm here to finalize the arrangements," I said, handing him the updated rental agreement. As he read, his expression shifted from confidence to disbelief. "This is absurd. You're demanding a rent that's beyond unreasonable." "It's the market rate for a property of this size in this location," I replied, my voice steady. "If you can't afford it, you'll have to vacate." Moran stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You can't do this to us. We have nowhere else to go." "That was your choice when you decided to push me out of my own home," I said, meeting her gaze. Greg slammed the document on the table. "We'll see what the court has to say about this. You're not going to get away with trying to evict us from our home." "This ceased being your home when you chose to disregard my rights and my feelings," I retorted. The air was thick with tension, the once familiar living room feeling like a foreign land. I looked around, memories flooding back of laughter, love, and a life that once was. Now it was just a shell housing bitterness and betrayal. As I turned to leave, Marion's voice stopped me. "Elise, please. We can negotiate. There must be a way to resolve this." I paused, considering her words. Then, with a resolve that surprised even me, I said, "There's nothing left to negotiate. You made your decision when you chose to side with Greg against me and Mia." With that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the echoes of a life that no longer existed. The days that followed were a mix of relief and uncertainty. The legal proceedings were grueling, but my resolve never wavered. I was fighting for my dignity, for my daughter, for the justice that had been denied to me. Eventually, the court ruled in my favor. Greg and Marion were given a month to vacate the property. The news hit them like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of their control and arrogance. I watched from a distance as they moved out, their belongings a testament to their shattered dreams and misplaced ambitions. In their eyes, I saw the realization of their defeat, the understanding that their manipulations had backfired. As I stepped back into my family home, now empty of their presence, a sense of peace enveloped me. It was not the peace of victory, but the peace of justice served. I walked through each room, reclaiming the space that had once been ours, mine, and Mia's. The walls that had witnessed so much pain now stood as silent sentinels to a new beginning. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be wounds to heal, memories to reconcile, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. I had fought against the odds, stood up to the tyranny of Greg and Moran, and emerged stronger. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of my life, a testament to the strength I never knew I possessed. The dust had settled, the legal battles were over, and the once turbulent house was now calm. As I stood in the empty living room, the memories of what had transpired echoed in the silence. Mia played in the corner, her laughter a balm to my weary heart. Watching her, I realized that this struggle, though fraught with pain, was necessary. It wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a battle for our future, for our peace. The day Greg and Moran left, I saw a glimpse of realization in their eyes, a dawning understanding of the consequences of their actions. Moran looked back at the house, her expression one of loss and regret. Greg, defeated and subdued, didn't meet my gaze. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to my small business, finding solace in the familiar routine and the support of my regular customers. Mia thrived in the newfound stability, her resilience a testament to the strength of our bond. One afternoon, as I was closing the shop, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Greg. He looked different, the arrogance replaced by a certain humility. Alice, he began awkwardly, I wanted to apologize for everything. I listened, a mix of surprise and skepticism. Why now, Greg? He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Losing the house, the divorce, it made me realize how wrong I was, how much I lost because of my pride and my mother's influence. I considered his words, the years of pain and struggle flashing through my mind. Your apology doesn't change what happened, Greg, but I accept it for Mia's sake. Greg nodded, a look of relief passing over his face. Thank you, Elise, and I'm sorry. Truly. As he walked away, I felt a chapter of my life closing. Greg's apology didn't erase the past, but it offered closure, a finality to the turmoil we had endured. In the months that followed, I renovated the house, turning it into a home once again. The walls were repainted, the rooms refurnished, and new memories were made. It was a sanctuary for Mia and me, a place of healing and growth. I often sat on the porch, watching Mia play in the yard, reflecting on our journey. The challenges had been immense, but they had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. Your story isn't just about revenge. It's a tale of empowerment, of rising above trials and tribulations to forge a better future for yourself and your daughter. The house, once a battleground of conflict and manipulation, was now a haven of peace and hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most rewarding victories. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, I held Mia close, grateful for the journey that had brought us here. We had overcome, we had triumphed, and we were finally home.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look, "To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day." Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. "So, you all get a chance." As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. "Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them." It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.